Hello, troublemakers. Welcome to this week's episode of Resolved Labor Podcast. I am your host, Lynn Fields, and this week we will be highlighting Howard Wallace. Howard Wallace was born August 29th, 1936. Shout out to the Virgos. His parents were H. Milo Wallace and Edna Horton. He had an older brother, John, and a sister, Barbara. He was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Now, the family first lived in Worcester, Massachusetts, and then they finally settled down in Denver, Colorado. And this is where Howard was basically raised. He came out to himself at a very young age. He says, quote, "I was aware of being gay in the second grade. It gave me a strong empathy with other underdogs that stuck with me all my life." In 1953, while in his junior year of high school, Howard joined the local chapters of the NAACP and the ACLU. So you know where this is going, guys. Like, this guy, troublemakers, it is in his blood. Like, he just has an inherent draw to, social justice movements. Because in junior high, in 1953, here we go, joining NAACP. So that was bold in and of itself. He, really quickly, he proved to be a really talented organizer and leader. And in 1955, at around the age of 19 or 20, he managed the campaign of the first Black candidate of the Denver School Board. He also worked on a successful campaign on the passage of Colorado's Fair Employment Practices and Anti-Discrimination Law in 1957. Now, this was one of the first laws in the U.S. on the books that prohibited workplace discrimination. And this law, it made it unfair, of course, just like how it sounds. It made it an unfair employment practice for an employer to refuse to hire, discharge, promote, or demote or discriminate in manager's compensation against any person otherwise qualified because of race, creed, color, national origin, or ancestry. He also served on the NAACP Denver and Colorado boards. So mind you, troublemakers, while this is going on in the late 50s, so Howard, our guy, he's around college age, right? He is in college and he is actively doing all this stuff. So, this did not sit well with his parents. And as a matter of fact, while he's working on, in all these organizations and he's, being an ally to all these marginalized communities, his father actually came to him, while he was a student, and he had these checks that were sitting on the dining room table. And Howard says that, he came home one day and, the checks were sitting there. And his dad said, "Look, all this fuckery, you hanging out with the colored, I don't know if the man said coloreds, but I'm just thinking in my head, it's the 50s, y'all. You hanging out, you trying to help all the colors. I'll tell you what, you knock off all this activism bullshit and these checks are going to go to your tuition, but you keep it going, then there will be no more college tuition," right? So to that, Howard says that he, it wasn't even a question. He just picked up the checks, ripped them up in his dad's face. And, to that, he said that, quote, that it was the end of my college education, end quote. So Howard, he starts working as a teamster and a warehouse worker. And he was openly gay, at this time, living out his life. And he starts working as a teamster, truck driver during these years. And in the early 1960s, he founded the Denver Friends of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and they organized, actions for Southern citizens in the civil rights movement. He was also part of the Denver Socialist Workers Party, shocker, and in 1962, he organized Denver Fair Play for Cuba Committee, and he remained a member of the Socialist Worker Party until the mid-70s, and he bounced because he saw that they were reluctant to take up LGBTQIA+ issues. In 1967, so Howard moves to San Francisco with a lover named Roger Hovland. And he continued to work, with the Teamsters, and he was in the anti-war movement as an organizer for the National Peace Action Coalition. And his actions, along with other activists, were successful in bringing labor into the anti-war movement, when they brought Northern California labor councils into officially opposing the war. In 1975, Howard founded the Bay Area Gay Liberation Society. So, BAGEL. I love acronyms, y'all. BAGEL. And according to Howard, the mission of BAGEL was to advance lesbian and gay liberation by reaching out to potential allies within the labor movement, the feminist movement, and movements of people of color and national minorities, end quote. Now, the organization, the life was very brief because they trying to reach everybody. They were very busy bees, and I can appreciate this. So although the organization's life was, short-lived, it was very brief, but they were really impactful. And during this same period, because, our guy Howard, he loves to form these committees. He also formed the Defend Gays in the Military Committee. Okay, troublemakers. So we got Howard. He's out here in San Francisco. He is living his best life. He is starting all these committees. He's on a bunch of committees, and he's still, working at Coors. And, he's got a reputation, he's really well known. And, so as far as his job at Coors, right? So let's talk about it. So the Coors Brewing Company. So in 1873, German immigrants Adolf Coors and Jacob Schuler, they immigrate to the United States and establish a brewery in Golden, Colorado. So Coors, Adolf Coors, he invests $2,000, and Schuler, he invested like $18,000. And in 1880, Coors bought out his partner and became the sole owner of the brewery. And so by this time, they became well known for, being one of the few beers that was created in the U.S. and not, to be pasteurized. So that means that the beer, didn't have to be refrigerated all the time. And they were also really well known because, their products was one of the ones that was only sold in the 11 states in the American West, as opposed to, nationally, like Anheuser-Busch and Schlitz and Pabst and all them. They were regional to the West. So in the 1930s, Adolf Coors II precedes his father as, the chief of the company. And he invites labor organizers to the company. And he was like, hey, y'all want to unionize the workers? Like, this is what I'm talking about. Like, this man was like, hey, come on in. This is the 30s. All y'all motherfuckers is unionizing. So before y'all come to me, I'm just going to come to y'all so that I can keep working. And this was very smart on his part. So, they unionized and, everything was going good. But by the 70s, now Adolf II's son, Joseph, is on the scene. And like he usually is, how y'all got that restaurant in y'all town. It's a family-owned business, and grandma and granddad, they start this damn restaurant. The food is the bomb. Everything is good. And then as the generations come up behind them and start taking over, now the food is not as good. It's not as seasoned, and they just start fucking it up. So let's talk about how, Joseph Coors starts fucking shit up. So first of all, let me start here, okay? Joseph Coors, one of the founders of the Heritage Foundation. And I'm just y'all do with that information what you will. So you already know where we going in this story if this dude is one of the founders of the Heritage Foundation. So another thing that I found out about Joseph, he served as a member of the Regents of the University of Colorado. And in that time, he opposed the creation of a chapter of the United Mexican American students on campus. He was like, nix that. I'm opposing, y'all creating a Mexican student alliance. Then he opposed, courses in regards to Chicano and Chicana studies. He didn't want to do that. He was like, fuck all that. The New York Times even wrote about him and said that they called him, quote, an ultra conservative zealot. Like this dude, he was putting money towards, Ronald Reagan's 1976 presidential campaign. He was donated money to the John Birch Society, the Free Congress Foundation, and the National Right to Work Committee. So I'm just painting y'all a picture of Joseph Ass, okay? In the 1970s, under Joseph's administration for the Coors Brewing Company, they had to settle out of court several racial and, gender discriminatory cases against the Coors Company, finding that they were underpaying workers and they were discriminating workers because of race and sex. And the Coors Company was using their trucks to break the Delano grape strike in California. They were using their trucks to transport grapes that were picked by non-unionized workers to the stores. So this guy was a real gem.
Hey, this is Dan Golodner from Tales from the Reuther Library. I'm proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network with more than 200 labor radio shows and podcasts from across the country and around the world. The Labor Radio Podcast Network, where working people speak. Find us at laborradionetwork.org.
So in the late 70s, there was a 178-page application process to get hired at Coors. And, a part of the application process was everybody had to take a polygraph, okay? And the union there, they said that this polygraph, that it violated privacy and led to discrimination. So there was questions, like I found out some of these questions, like the use of marijuana, personal debts the individual owed, political affiliation. And as far as political affiliation, they specifically asked about, quote, subversive, revolutionary, or communist activities, end quote. And a question that said, is there anything in your personal life that might tend to discredit or embarrass the company if known? And there was another question about sexual orientation. Like they just straight up asked people, are you gay? And if you answered yes to, being homosexual or having used marijuana, like apparently these questions, affirmative answers to these questions was automatic disregard for your application. Now, the company denies that they ever asked anybody was they gay, but everybody ain't lying, Coors. Everybody is not lying, okay? And also, according to Coors, about 45% of the applicants failed the question about drug use. I'm not saying, but I'm just saying, y'all, I probably would have failed. I don't qualify to work at Coors in 1977. And y'all can just do with that information what you will. So around this time, Alan Bird, who is the president of Teamsters Local 921, he had helped organize the Coors distribution workers in San Francisco. So he reached out to an activist, our guy, Howard. And because remember, guys, Howard is an openly gay truck driver there. So with the Teamsters. So he reaches out to Howard and they, organize and they, come up with this plan to put the LGBTQ activists and the labor activists together to do this large scale boycott in the Bay Area. And what they did was they convinced like a whole bunch of gay bars around this area to refuse to carry Coors products. Like, like after they told them about how shitty they were treating the gay workers, like they went out, they poured the alcohol into the street, and then they refused to work with the Coors Brewing Company anymore. And then this also got the attention of Harvey Milk, who was a gay activist and politician in that area. And he helped to strengthen and coordinate the boycott. And then it just gave some validity, to this alliance. The boycott spread throughout the Castro district, which is the city's gay neighborhood. And, Harvey Milk, he encouraged the Teamsters to hire the openly gay people to oppose, the California measure. It was a ballot measure called the Briggs Amendment that, would ban LGBTQ teachers from employment. So they were working on multiple campaigns at the same time. So you got the economic campaign about the firing and hiring of the gay teachers. And we also have the Coors boycott going on at the same time. And there was an activist named Tammy Gold who she claimed that the boycott was, quote, perhaps one of the first major public demonstrations of the links between class and sexual identity. Now, remember, troublemakers, these workers, they are a part of a union, but it wasn't a very strong union. And it was an open secret that this union was very weak. And in 1975, there was an article in the New York Times that described the unions at Coors as, quote, weak, because it highlighted a bunch of failed strikes throughout the history of that union. And around this time, remember, we're fighting for, all these, they had these 21 things that you could be fired for at Coors. And it included, quote, discourage any person from drinking Coors beer. So if you, went to, you told your family, don't drink that, this shit tastes like horse piss or whatever, or, quote, making disparaging remarks about the employer. These are things, you're basically infringing on my free will and my free speech. These were in their labor contract. And the union president, even though he said that the contract was pretty lousy, they had to admit that the pay and the benefits, offered by the company, that they were above average, and better than most in the industry. And they basically conceded that, quote, as long as they're getting a high wage rate and aren't faced with disciplinary action, their contract doesn't mean much to them. But, you guys all know that all money is not good money. And so if you can't even go to work and be comfortable and speak your mind, even in your off time, that is 100%, it's just not right. And so on April 5th, 1977, approximately 1,500 union members walked out en masse and they, went on strike. And the next day, the company sent letters to the striking workers saying that they were going to hire strike breakers. And then, if they had to do all that, then they were going to lose their position, the normal threats and the normal fuckery. And on April 12th, the AFL-CIO announced a national boycott of Coors in support of the local, which is at the time Local 366. And around this time, the company president, Jeff Coors, because, this is a family business, he put out a statement saying that, if they agreed to the union's proposals, that it would be quote, inviting the Russians to take over America. Because, communism. So I'm just going to say right here, troublemakers, that it was really disheartening to read this quote from the union president basically saying, look, long as I'm getting paid, I don't have no problems. We have to remember that wages and working conditions are the same. There is no number one, number two. They are right there together. That's why it's called wages and working conditions. Your disciplinary process, the grievance process, those things, those are your working conditions. And the thing about a job is you got to want to go there. And you cannot just say, okay, as long as I'm making money, then you can just shit all over me at work. Your seniority rights, right? That's a part of your working conditions. So when we concede and give those things up because our dignity can be bought, then, we have to be able to look at ourselves in the mirror and decide what is the good fight. Because remember, I was talking about this strike. This strike is a non-wage strike, right? So it's not an economic strike. They're just talking about working conditions. So shortly after the strike starts, y'all know Coors. Coors is going to go in while the iron is hot, right? And they start pushing for the union shop rule to be revoked. Now, their argument was that the non-union workers or the strike breaker workers, they shouldn't have to pay dues to support a strike that they weren't even a part of. So, because hundreds of strike breakers had been hired during this time, and then a bunch of the strikers, they actually came back to work. So soon, pretty soon, everybody started talking about the issue is the strike concerning keeping the union shop rule and pushing for the rehiring of the strikers. So like all the other stuff that we talked about, like the reasons that you can get fired rule and, the polygraph, like all that went out the window. And so by early 1978, so Coors is seeking a vote on whether to decertify the union. And so after $254,000 was paid in back pay, and after 20 months of being on strike, the union decides to take this vote. Now, by June, the majority of strikers had already returned to work, and then they took the vote in December. And by this time, only 500 of the initial 1,500 strikers were still on strike. And on December 14th, it was reported by the Associated Press that workers had voted 993 to 408 to decertify the Brewery Workers Local 366, which effectively brought an end to the strike. Now, I know troublemakers that, it's disheartening to hear that our union, was basically decertified. However, the strike and, the boycott against Coors Brewing Company, like it went on like well into the 80s. Like the gay community was standing 10 toes down with like, there will be no Coors here. And at the time, in the 70s, in the late 70s, the market share in California had dropped for Coors had dropped from a high of over 40% to 14%. And there was a similar drop from 47% in 1977 to 24% in 1984. And even the Coors officers, the LA Times claimed that they conceded that the boycott, which was joined over the years by various special interest groups, opposed to the outspoken political conservatism of Coors family patriarch Joseph Coors, had damaged its main market areas in the West and its drive for nationwide sales. And even like as late as 2019, so even as of 2019, there are still like, you can still not find any Coors beers in the gay bars and in the bars in the San Francisco area. So troublemakers, our guy Howard, as always, the beat does go on. And, Howard, he continued his activism, with marrying, labor rights and gay rights. During his time here with us, he convinced the San Francisco Labor Council to become the first labor council in the country to go on record supporting gay rights. There was a major press conference and Howard was photographed with, all the major labor leaders, the top labor leaders in the city. He worked with Northern California Peace, Jobs, and Justice Coalition for a brief period. He joined the staff of the United Farm Workers Union at the specific request of Cesar Chavez. And it was when he was working there that he struck up a lifelong friendship with Dolores Huerta. Dolores even, credits Howard for saving her life during the 1991 San Francisco anti-Gulf War demonstration where a police officer, ruptured her spleen. She said it was Howard that saved her life that day. Howard joined the staff of SEIU Union of Hospital Workers, Local 250. At the behest of the president. He worked there for 14 years as an organizer and community representative. And during those times, the locals stood out as one of the first unions in the country to unite LGBT and labor struggles. And they educated both movements about the other. And he retired in 2001. And the lesbian gay labor alliance that he formed in the mid 1980s, that turned into Pride at Work, which is now, a nationally AFL-CIO endorsed and recognized affiliate, where they push for proper LGBTQ rights on the job and legislatively. So if you're not a part of Pride at Work, shameless plug, please consider looking up your local chapter and or starting a local chapter. On November 14th, 2012, Howard Wallace passed away in Buena Vista Manor in San Francisco. He was 76 years old. According to a statement put out by Pride at Work, he had been battling Alzheimer's for several years. His ceremony was held at a union hall where they told lively stories about him and talked about how much he loved karaoke. Some of his friends talked about how they would dread every time the phone would ring and it was him on the other end, because they just knew he was going to be asking them to do something. I can feel that. I feel like that's what my friends feel like when I call. But that's not a bad thing. And that, Troublemakers, is the story of Howard Wallace. So, Troublemakers, as of this recording, I'm sad to report that on September 25th, 2024, William Bill Lucy, Secretary Treasurer Emeritus of AFSCME International, passed away. He was 90 years old. Literally, we are standing on the shoulders of this man. I was able to, see him speak many times. Unfortunately, I never got to take a picture with him, but I have several pictures of him. And so it's a really, it's bittersweet because he lived a really long life. But he was a champion. He was one of us, and, he will be greatly missed. So this week, for giving flowers, I would like to read a statement by the president of AFSCME International, Lee Saunders, that was sent out in reference to the passing of Bill Lucy. And Lee Saunders writes, "Bill was a giant, one of the most accomplished and influential trade unionists ever in any country at any moment in history. He did as much as anyone to advance the dignity of all working people here in the United States and around the world. He was one of the greatest warriors ever for civil rights, labor rights, and human rights. From his leadership in the 1968 Memphis sanitation strike to the founding of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, to his role in defeating and dismantling South African apartheid, he was a courageous trailblazer. We are all grateful for his visionary leadership from the moment he first joined our union nearly 70 years ago. On a personal level, he was a mentor to me, someone I leaned on for counsel and wisdom. We all stand on his shoulders, and we will continue to be inspired by his example. In solidarity, Lee." So I did do a story on Bill Lucy, episode 9, shameless plug. And with that, I'm going to say rest in power, Brother Lucy. We will continue the fight, and we will take the mantle from here. So, Troublemakers, if you would like to, give flowers to someone in your local, someone in your community who you would like recognized for their work in this movement, please write to us. Please write to us at resolvedlaborpod@gmail.com. That is resolvedlaborpod@gmail.com. And we would be honored to read one of your letters on the air. And don't forget to follow us. Don't forget to like us, follow us, share us, review us, all the things us. And if you don't like us, tell someone you don't like and waste their time. Thanks for listening, troublemakers. As always, peace and solidarity. This week's episode of Resolved Labor Podcast is produced by The Create Place Studio. You can find them on all social media platforms at The Create Place STL. We Won is performed by Joe Jinks and written by John O'Connor. This has been Resolved Labor Podcast. As always, peace and solidarity.
Everybody come and join in the union. Begin, begin, begin. Stand together to overcome soon, and we win, we win, we